Chapter 5. The book writes. Sophia sat at her desk, staring at her laptop screen with growing horror. The document was open, the words displayed in crisp black text. Words she didn't remember typing. Clara returned home, shaken by the news of the murder. She tried to resist the pull of the story, but her hands moved on their own, typing the next events before she could stop them. She wasn't the author anymore. The book was writing itself. Sophia's hands trembled as she reached for the keyboard. Had she written that? No, she couldn't have. She hadn't opened her laptop since returning from her uncle's house, and yet the words were there, fresh as if they had been typed moments ago. Her breath came in short gasps as she scrolled down. More lines had appeared, ones she was certain she hadn't written. Clara knew she couldn't run from the truth. Another death was coming. Someone close to her, someone she loved. Sophia shoved her chair back, knocking into the desk. Her pulse thundered in her ears. This wasn't just coincidence anymore. Someone was controlling the story. And if it was following her plot, another death was imminent. Nathan noticed something was wrong the second Sophia opened the door. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, stepping inside. Sophia swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. "I need to show you something." She led him to her desk, pointing at the laptop screen. "I didn't write that," she whispered. "It just appeared." Nathan frowned, leaning in to read. His face paled as he reached the last line. "Another death is coming," he muttered. Sophia nodded. "In the book, after the first murder, another person dies. And in real life," Nathan straightened, jaw tightening, "who dies next in your story?" Sophia's throat went dry. She didn't want to say it. Didn't want to even think it, but she had to. In the book, it was the protagonist's best friend. Nathan's eyes widened. Lena? A chill shot through Sophia's body. Lena, her best friend, the person who had texted her last night checking in, the next victim in the story. Without another word, Sophia grabbed her phone and dialed Lena's number. It rang. Once. Twice. Then, "The number you are trying to reach is unavailable." Panic clawed at Sophia's chest. "We need to go to her house. Now." Lena's apartment complex was eerily silent when they arrived. The building's exterior lights flickered, casting long shadows across the pavement. Sophia banged on the door, her breath coming in frantic bursts. "Lena, open up." No answer. Nathan tried the doorknob. It was locked. "Stand back," he muttered, then threw his weight against the door. On the third attempt, it gave way, swinging open with a loud crack. Sophia's heart pounded as she stepped inside. The apartment was dimly lit. Papers were scattered across the floor, a chair was overturned, and on the coffee table her blood ran cold when she saw it. A copy of her book, the draft she had printed weeks ago, open to the chapter where the best friend dies. Sophia barely had time to process it before she heard a faint noise from the hallway, a weak cough. She turned sharply toward the bedroom, dread pooling in her stomach. "Lena?" she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. No response. Sophia rushed into the room and froze. Lena lay on the floor, her skin pale, her breath shallow. A half-empty glass of wine sat beside her, the deep red liquid glistening in the dim light. Poison, just like in the book. Sophia dropped to her knees, shaking Lena's shoulders. "Lena, stay with me." Lena's eyelids fluttered open, her gaze hazy. She tried to speak, but only a faint whisper escaped. Sophia turned to Nathan in panic. "Call an ambulance! Now!" Nathan was already dialing. Sophia gripped Lena's hand, her mind spinning. This wasn't just a nightmare anymore. The book was dictating reality, and if she didn't find a way to stop it, someone else would die next. Chapter 6, the final chapter, is coming. Lena survived. Barely. The doctors said she had been poisoned, but the dose wasn't enough to kill her. Not yet. If Sophia and Nathan hadn't found her in time, it would have been too late. Sophia sat by Lena's hospital bed, gripping her cold fingers. Machines beeped softly in the background, their steady rhythm the only reassurance that her best friend was still alive. This was no longer a coincidence. Every event from her book was unfolding, down to the smallest detail. The letter, the first murder, the poisoned drink, each one mirroring the exact sequence in her story, and there was only one chapter left. The final chapter of her book. The chapter she had written at 2 a.m., exhausted but exhilarated, thinking it was nothing more than fiction. It ended with the protagonist's death. If the story continued to play out the way it was written, Sophia was next. Nathan sat across from her in the hospital waiting room, his knee bouncing restlessly. We need to figure out who's doing this. Sophia swallowed, her throat dry. I think I already did. Nathan frowned. What do you mean? She took a deep breath, forcing herself to say it. Whoever is behind this, they're following my book, word for word, which means they know my story. Nathan's eyes darkened. Someone who's read your manuscript. Sophia nodded, her mind racing. She had never published the book, hadn't even shared it with an editor yet. Only a handful of people had ever seen it. Her heart pounded as she whispered, There are only 3 people who have read my draft. Nathan's jaw tightened. Who? Sophia hesitated. Then she counted them off on her fingers. My professor. He reviewed an early version last year. Nathan nodded, expression unreadable. Who else? Lena? Sophia said, her stomach twisting. She read the whole thing before I put it away, but obviously it's not her, which leaves one more person. Nathan leaned forward, his voice deadly calm. Who? Sophia's hands clenched into fists. The truth was so simple, so obvious, yet she had refused to see it. Her fingers dug into her palms as she finally spoke the name. Mom. Sophia's mother answered the door with red-rimmed eyes, as if she had been crying. Sophia, she breathed. What are you doing here? Sophia stepped inside, Nathan close behind. She could feel the weight of the house pressing in on her, every shadow stretching just a little too long, every creaking floorboard setting her nerves on edge. Whoever is doing this, Sophia said slowly, has read my book. Her mother's face paled. What are you talking about? I never told you what my book was about, Sophia continued. But you knew, didn't you? Her mother didn't respond. Nathan stepped forward. Did you read it? Silence. Then her mother let out a shuddering breath and sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. Yes, she whispered. Sophia felt the air rush from her lungs. How? She demanded. When? Her mother looked up at her, eyes filled with something unreadable. You left the printed draft on your desk last year. I was cleaning and I skimmed a few pages. I didn't mean to. But you did. Sophia's mind spun. This didn't make sense. If her mother had read it, that didn't mean she was behind the murders. Unless a horrifying thought struck her. Sophia's book hadn't just been a story. It was connected to her family, to her past. Every event mirrored something real. The hidden sibling, the secret past, the murders. What do you know? Sophia's voice shook. What aren't you telling me? Her mother buried her face in her hands. I was trying to protect you. From what? Nathan demanded. Tears slid down her mother's cheeks. From the ending, she whispered. Sophia's blood turned to ice. Because in her book, the protagonist, Clara, died at the hands of someone she trusted. And now, as her mother sat there trembling, refusing to meet her eyes, Sophia realized something terrifying. The final chapter wasn't just coming. It had already begun. Chapter 7, Rewriting Fate. Sophia's heart pounded as she stared at her mother, the woman who had raised her, the woman who had loved her, the woman who was hiding something. Nathan was tense beside her, fists clenched at his sides. What do you mean, from the ending? He demanded. Sophia's mother exhaled shakily. I read your book, Sophia, and when I did, I knew. She looked up, eyes shining with unshed tears. I knew it wasn't just fiction. Sophia's breath caught. Her mother pressed a hand to her chest as if trying to steady herself. You thought you were making up a story, but you weren't. You were writing the past, the secrets I tried so hard to bury. Sophia felt the floor tilt beneath her. What are you talking about? Her mother shut her eyes as if summoning the courage to say what came next. The sibling you wrote about. She swallowed. They were real. Sophia's world stopped. Everything, the strange letter, Uncle James' murder, the story coming true, clicked into place with horrifying clarity. The child, they were taken from us before you were born, her mother admitted. Your father, he was involved in something dangerous, something that got people killed. Sophia could barely breathe. And Uncle James, her mother's lip trembled. He knew the truth. He was trying to warn you. Sophia's stomach twisted. So you're saying I somehow wrote the truth without ever knowing it? Her mother nodded. I don't know how, but when I read your book, I realized what was coming. Sophia's pulse pounded. The final chapter. Her mother's fingers clenched together. In your book, the protagonist dies. Silence filled the room. The words lingered in the air, suffocating. Nathan spoke first, his voice sharp. Who's behind this? Sophia's mother hesitated. Then, crash! The front door burst open. A shadow moved fast. Too fast. Sophia barely had time to react before something cold and metallic pressed against her temple. A gun. A voice, chillingly familiar, whispered in her ear. You should have stopped writing, Sophia. Her blood ran cold. Professor Alden. Nathan lunged forward, but the professor's grip tightened on Sophia, keeping her locked in place. Move, and she dies, Alden warned. Sophia's breaths came fast and shallow. Why? She managed to whisper. Alden let out a low, humorless chuckle. Because you wrote the truth. He pressed the gun harder against her skin. I thought I buried it years ago, but then your uncle started digging. And then you wrote it all down as if you knew. I had no choice but to make sure your story never saw the light of day. Sophia's hands curled into fists. You killed Uncle James. Alden smirked. Of course. The rage inside Sophia burned white hot. She had spent her whole life thinking she was just a writer, making up stories in her head, but somehow her words had uncovered a truth that was never meant to be known. And if the book had dictated everything so far, she knew what came next. The final confrontation, her own death. Unless, no, she refused to let the book control her. She was the author, and it was time to change the ending. Alden was focused on Nathan, who stood tense, looking for an opening. Sophia took a slow, deliberate breath. Then she moved. With all her strength, she slammed her elbow into Alden's ribs. The sudden impact made him grunt in pain, and his grip loosened. Nathan took the opening. He lunged, knocking the gun from Alden's hand. It clattered to the floor. Sophia dove for it first. Her fingers closed around the cold metal. She rolled onto her back, aimed. Don't move, she said, voice steady. Alden froze. Nathan wrenched him away, pinning him to the ground. Sophia's hands shook, but she didn't lower the gun. She had rewritten the ending. She was supposed to die, but she didn't. She chose to live. The police arrived minutes later. Alden was arrested. Lena recovered. Sophia finally learned the truth about her lost sibling, a brother taken from their family long ago. But the most important thing, she stopped writing the story. And for the first time in weeks, reality stopped following the words on the page. She had broken the cycle. She had reclaimed control. She had rewritten fate. Thank you so much for watching and following along on this wild journey through the twists and turns of my story. Who knew that the line between fiction and reality could be so blurry, right? If you loved the mystery, the suspense, and of course the jaw-dropping twists, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on more thrilling tales. Who knows what the next chapter will hold? Until then, keep writing your own stories, because you never know what might come to life.